Good afternoon, everyone. This is the December meeting of Progressive Legacy. My name is Alan Bowser. I'm one of the coordinators of Progressive Legacy. Thank you all for joining us. We have an exciting program this afternoon. We are going to chat with two candidates for the courthouse in Montgomery County. Bernice Mireku-North, who's a candidate for Montgomery County State's Attorney, and Robert Bass, a candidate for Montgomery County Sheriff. We've asked both of them to make some opening remarks, and then we'll let it be open to questions from people on the call. We're videotaping this program, and we'll make it available on our Facebook page and other social media. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my friend Bernice Mireku-North, who is running for State's Attorney in Montgomery County and has had a very exciting campaign to date, and we're glad to welcome her here today. Bernice, please.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you guys so much for allowing me the opportunity to speak before you this evening. I'm glad that we're not tired of Zoom yet, right? We're still willing to do these Zoom meetings. So we're not Zoomed out yet, so thank you so much. So just a little bit about me. One of the three things that I have pretty much lived my life doing was focusing on my family, the community, and the courtroom. Those are pretty much the things that I focus on and what I'm really all about in a nutshell. I grew up in Montgomery County. I went to Blair High School, and I'm a child of immigrants, African immigrants. My parents came from Ghana in West Africa. And I spent most of my high school career really focused on like high school journalism, things like that. But I always was involved in community. I think my first community gig was working on HIV awareness, for instance. But when I got to college at the University of Maryland, I turned my attention to politics, and that's where I ultimately got a degree in doing. In fact, one of my jobs in college was working for Progressive Maryland as a canvasser. So talking about 20 years of me investing my time in Montgomery County, not just as a student, but as an adult. I went on to Howard University School of Law, and then after I graduated from Howard, I clerked for 2 judges in DC Superior Court and then in Prince George's County Circuit Court before I became a prosecutor. I was a prosecutor in Anne Arundel County, Maryland, for about 6 years, but I never left Montgomery County. In fact, it's where I got married, where I started my family, as I mentioned, and where I got my feet wet really in civic activism. I worked because it felt like work, but it was also fun. I was on the Silver Spring Citizens Advisory Board for nearly 6 years, where I held on to several leadership positions and eventually became chair of the advisory board for 2 years. And it was during that time, actually, that I got my feet wet in dealing with criminal justice reform. Because if you remember about 10 years ago, we had an issue of crime rising in Silver Spring. It was youth crime, and the proposed solution was a youth curfew. And as a prosecutor at that time, I felt that that wasn't necessarily the best decision. And it really required reaching all the community members, all the different stakeholders, youth groups, principals, civic activists, to come up with a better solution. And the better solution was ultimately increasing more money in youth development, positive youth development programs. And the curfew was no longer an issue. In fact, I think it was tabled indefinitely. So that's really where I got my feet wet in terms of the real criminal justice reform with the tools that I had at that time. But I also knew as a prosecutor, the justice system does not work for everyone. I've seen the injustices, especially with immigrant populations. For instance, I saw one Latino that got charged with driving without a license. And at the time when it was a jailable offense, they would easily get a maximum of 60 days because they couldn't produce a license because they didn't have the papers. Those are types of moments that are etched in my mind as a child of immigrants, as a reform-minded person when I was a prosecutor that I carry with me to this day. I went on to private practice about 2015. I worked for a small firm before eventually going out on my own and starting my own practice, doing criminal defense work, and I do also do guardianships as well. But what led me to want to run for state's attorney was that I really felt like we were ready for a new vision of justice. Some of you have, well, I know I have prescription glasses, and every few years, you just have to get them changed because what you might think is the right vision might not be what everyone else is seeing. And that's what I was seeing in especially the last 18 months when I was serving as co-chair of our county's Reimagining Public Safety Task Force. We were focusing on police reform, not just police reform, but public safety reform. So we dealt with police, we dealt with prosecutors, we dealt with 911 calls. We ran the gamut as to how to make sure that this system is safer and more trustworthy and less bias for everyone in this county, as diverse as it is. And I found the status quo was not in step with what the community was looking for. And I felt that it was time for us as county residents to have another option, to have a discussion as to what we want our justice system to look like and what we want our justice system to be principled on. So in terms of my principles and what I would like to see happen when I am elected as the first female, first woman of color state's attorney, is based on you said three, so I'll narrow it down to three main areas. One, seeking greater transparency and accountability for prosecutors as well as the police. What often happens is that, at least with where has been currently, when defense attorneys will try to get information on use of force complaints and things like that, there's been a lot of roadblocks, a lot of legal maneuvering to avoid complying with these requests. And I wouldn't do that. I think we have to fight to make sure that everyone's on an equal playing field when it comes to matters of the courtroom, when it comes to the accused. Just because someone's accused doesn't mean you have to hide behind any law to make it a disadvantage for the accused. I think we have to have a fair process and being transparent as to what's going on with all the witnesses, including police officers. And on the topic of police use of force, I also realized that use of force complaints aren't treated the same way by the different districts. They're all treated differently. And for one thing that I want to propose, something that actually has been done in Cook County, is to have a unit or a procedure where all the use of force complaints go through one channel, that being the state's attorney's office. The least that one can do is just review them and take any appropriate action within the rights of a prosecutor's office. But having it all in one central location, I think, is a good start to make sure that everyone feels like they're being treated fairly by the police and that accountability is actually being done by someone who one has elected to look after that issue. So the second thing is working on alternatives to incarceration. As I realized as a prosecutor, the prosecutor's office, criminal justice system is a pathway to mass incarceration. There's no ands buts about it. And what dealing with how are these individuals getting into the system in the first place where mass incarceration is even on the table. So changing the screening process as to how these cases even get into court. So let me step back and explain what that means, because a lot of people don't know what happens after the police make an arrest, right? So when the police make an arrest, there are determination of charges, whether it's sent to what's called the commissioner's office, whether it's like a grand jury that decides, but ultimately charges have to be filed. And the traditional way of looking at it is, well, let's just see the facts, let's see the law, and let's see what we can charge based on that. Well, we can overcharge based on that, so we can ensure a guilty plea or a conviction, because that is what the traditional ultimate goal is to get a conviction as a prosecutor. But what I'm proposing is having a more, I say, for lack of a better word, progressive way of looking at it, dealing with the root cause of the problem, and whether it's bringing a social worker, some sort of racial justice expert, something to that effect, in addition to determining what charges are appropriate, so we can understand the full course of the full scope of the problem before there's even any consideration of letting it go through the system. I think that's a missing element that I know this county is ready for to consider. I think if I recall, it's Arlington County that just recently got some federal funding from DOJ to have that type of screening process, to include a social worker and another non-lawyer in analyzing the cases before it gets to any particular charges to be filed, if that's even necessary. It could be a situation where restorative justice is an alternative, mediation is an alternative. Those are things that have to be considered, not when jail's on the line, but when there's this opportunity that one has to go through the system. I think that's the real difference that I want to seek as the next prosecutor for this county. And three, as I touched on a little bit, restorative justice. I really feel like it's important to get to the root cause of the problem. And it's more than just getting a conviction. It's really, how are we healing our community? As we know, with COVID-19 and the pandemic, there's been a lot of things that have been exacerbated, financial difficulties, mental health difficulties. And we need a prosecutor who is sensitive to that and understanding of that, and is not afraid to say, well, look how we can do this holistically, rather than just doing the same old. Because if we do the same old, we're losing it. We're going to lose a generation. Look at all the recent crime that's happened in Montgomery County. Even though crime has gone down, it's the types of crimes that are happening that are going up. Crimes involving just interacting with other people that we are familiar with. And that's a humanity issue that's at place. And it's happening really among young people. I would say maybe between 13 and 19. I mean, that's a generation that's in real peril right now. And to not have anything in place to deal with that in a holistic fashion means we're putting them through the school to prison pipeline rapidly. And that's not the way to go. I mean, Montgomery County, as much as it spends on our education system, I think we deserve a chance to have a criminal justice system that doesn't criminalize those students. So those are the three of the main things I want to touch on. I have a lot more to say, but you said three, so I'll limit it to that. And hope to have your support, and thank you for having me on this evening.
Thank you, Bernice. That was very informative. We're really excited about your campaign for state's attorney. Any members of the group would like to ask Bernice questions, please unmute yourself and just say something. Rosie, why don't you go first?
I've been very disturbed about the news in downtown Silver Spring. It's very, very negative, and you kind of hinted about this. What would you have done about that?
I think there's like I said, it's a real crisis at hand, and not just, well, first of all, what's currently happening is let's just add more police. Let's just add more law enforcement presence. But there's more than that. It's really going back to, okay, what's going on in the community? What are the resources that are lacking that is perpetuating this problem? When I was in the Silver Spring Citizen Advisory Board, I also served on a group called the African Immigrant and Refugee Foundation, which dealt with youth that are trying to get acclimated to American life, and it involved a whole lot of resources. And I just thought to myself, gosh, if we had something similar to that, or let's put some money into that, that might help. Because not only is it a youth crisis, it's also disproportionately impacting those in the African diaspora. Just most recently, the last murder that occurred was some Congolese community. It's a bigger problem than just crime. It's about cultural issues that are happening that we're not addressing, and we don't have the resources in place right now to help. And as a prosecutor, when you're seeing that in the courtroom, you're seeing that in the system, I think it's very critical to be the bullhorn out in the community, say, hey, look, this is what's happening in the courtroom. Let's try to deal with this out in the community. Let's bring the youth groups, let's bring the civic activists, come together, and how can we restore our community? It's going to take community conversations. It's going to take dollars and fighting for those dollars in Annapolis or at the county level. And it takes a prosecutor who's willing to say, I'm willing to go beyond the scope of a traditional prosecutor and really do the right work for the community and make sure that everyone feels safe. So what's currently happening is not that. What's currently happening is this fear mongering, which is just highly unnecessary, because it's beyond the crime. It's beyond the crime. It's about the people that are hurting. It's people that need the mental healing, that they just don't know what to do because there's no resources out there to help them navigate this time. So thank you for that question.
Okay. This is Dio.
Hi, Dio.
Hello, how are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Yes, in September, Montgomery County Schools removed the resource officers from the schools because of the inordinate number of Black and Brown students who were being targeted and criminalized. And I was just wondering, now they're in some quarters, they seem to be revisiting that decision. What is your opinion?
As a prosecutor that was on the task force that recommended removing the SROs, I would continue that front. I think it's a situation where you look at the law, you don't have to have the SROs. It's either adequate police coverage or SROs. And at this point, that's the law that's in place. And so we don't have that SROs because I believe that is introduction to the school to prison pipeline. I can give you examples. A number of the cases that I've had as a criminal defense attorney, a lot of them 18, 19 years old, freely talking to police, freely. And when there's a confession and a little bit of facts, that's a conviction. That sets them on the path to a very difficult future. And that is because they are trained to think, oh, the police are my friend. They're not going to do anything. But that's not the case. It literally is not the case. So I come from a practitioner standpoint on that issue. So it's bigger for me than the philosophy. It's what I've actually seen in the courtroom, which is why I don't think, from what I heard, I don't think the county council or the county executive will revisit, or I'm sorry, the school board will revisit that. I know there's been some cries for it, but no, the school system is focused on restorative justice, and I agree with that, but we don't have a system in place in the public safety sector to complement that. For example, the Blair High School stabbing that occurred, I believe it was a teacher that witnessed this, and this is maybe a few weeks after the school had, I can't remember because so many things have happened. I think it was October. What jarred me was, in a system, in a school system that they're preaching restorative justice, here is this young kid, 16-year-old kid that's about to get charged as an adult. Where's the restorative justice there? Where's the restorative justice there? Now, that's the kind of thinking that I want to focus on as the next prosecutor, is how do we bridge the gap between the status quo of what's happening in the courthouse and the reform-minded work that's being done in the school system for our children. I have a 5-year-old, so I'm very invested in making sure that we have a system that is going to help people from all walks of life. And as it stands now, the school system, it's mostly Black and Latino. So we need to be conscious of that, the cultural differences and difficulties with that when we're teaching our students. So it's a long answer saying, no, I would not continue to support the SROs.
Thank you for the question, Dio. Does anybody else have a question they'd like to ask Bernice? I should ask you all to use the raise your hand function so it's easier for me to identify you. Bernice, I've got a question. As you've traveled around the county with your campaign, and I've seen you've been to many places, do you have a sense that people understand what who the prosecutor is and what prosecutors do? And have you thought about how to raise the level of awareness among the public about this very important role?
Good question. The general consensus is that, yes, what is a prosecutor? Is that Brian Frosch's job? Is that the attorney general? Because when I say state's attorney, they think state of Maryland. But the way I go about it is that once the police make an arrest, what happens next? And people say, I don't know. And that begins the introduction of what the prosecutor can do, and how a prosecutor's decisions could help or destroy communities based upon what charges are filed and what sentences they recommend. And how they word certain situations. For instance, the issue in Silver Spring, the stabbing in Silver Spring, the current state's attorney has penned it as this drug deal gone bad. But what I saw Saturday when I went to the visual was a Congolese community hurting, a mother and father hurting. That's a different perspective on how to look at the situation. So in terms of how to teach those that want to do the right thing in terms of making the right decision to vote, and what a prosecutor does, it really is just educating everybody I meet. I have a lot of volunteers on my team that have been door knocking and going to events with me, and educating them to educate other people on what a prosecutor does. That's why I value these types of opportunities to speak to folks on Zoom or even in person once people are comfortable, because that's what it's going to take. I am a first-time candidate. I'm not new to politics. I'm a first-time candidate, so I can't promise the immediate dollars to educate people. But believe me, when I am in that office, we will start educating. We will start educating, because I think we deserve that. Montgomery County is a strong county. It's the largest county in the state of Maryland. I think we deserve to have all the information that is available to us to make sure that we're making the right decisions of who we vote for.
Alan,
Go
I'm
right
so,
ahead.
I was looking for the raise hand icon. This is Dio.
I see you. Go right ahead,
But since
Dio.
okay, yes, I know in some cases, some of the problems that we've had as a county dealing with police use of force have been related to the fact that the FOP has such an outsized presence. And I was wondering, I've heard talk of whether this presence might be reduced somewhat if they were removed from the collective bargaining process on officer discipline. How do you feel about that?
I don't know. Honestly, when we were doing the work on the task force, unfortunately, that subject wasn't really fleshed out enough for me to give like a real strong opinion about it. I think that makes sense if, once they're removed, the mood changes, right? Once the pressure is off, people feel differently and they talk differently and they negotiate differently. So the FOP, has their talking points. They have their stance. They historically have their bent on certain ways of looking at crime. You look at what's happening now with Silver Spring. Also, you see all these stories about how crime is rising. I mean, you can't tell me that's not FOP. You can't tell me that's not them with their talking points already set, because they've been around longer. They know what to do. They have everything set in stone. So I think removing them from the process would definitely change the landscape. I just can't say to what extent. But yeah, I think they are a factor. They're a well-grounded institution that I'm not afraid to stand up to. Wasn't afraid to stand up to in the task force. I'm not afraid to stand up to now. Because I know the officers just want to do the right job. Because I worked with them. They're human beings just like you and I. They're trained to do a job. And it's okay to stand up to them and tell them this is the right thing to do for the community, because they would change their ways. I can't speak on FOP because that's an institution, but the officers want to change their ways. So if I have to challenge the FOP, I think about the officers on the street that are just trying to do their jobs and not feel demoralized by this national bashing of police, because it is demoralizing to them. I can understand that. So that's why I'm not afraid to challenge what I have to challenge, to make sure that the officers are doing their job and people feel safe in their communities.
I have
Thank
a
you,
question.
Dio, and
Yes,
thank you for the answer, Bernice. One last question for Bernice.
I have a question.
Okay, go right ahead, Barbara.
I was wondering, what kind of facilities do you have for juveniles who come into the system for criminal acts?
The facilities, like when
I
they
mean, where do
are,
you put them, or what arrangements do you have available?
well, when they are charged, they go through Department of Juvenile Services, which is a state agency. They make a determination as to whether to elevate the case to the state's attorney's office or not. That's for most cases. If it's an adult charge like murder or like kidnapping or a serious assault, there are exceptions. For the most part, It goes to the state agency, they make the determination, and they decide that, hey, we can handle it through the Department of Juvenile Services, then State Attorney's Office does not see it. If they decide to forward it, there's nothing really currently in place to divert them anywhere else, but at the juvenile facility, if they need to be held at juvenile facility, or they can be at home pending adjudication. There's no diversion or no real programs between the moment that is decided to have the prosecutor charge and the end adjudication date, unless there's the truancy court. That's about it. But that's all there is in terms of how do you deal with what's going on with the youth pending the situation, and that's a problem. That's a really, really big problem for me. And I think I looked at the budget over the course of this campaign. I've looked at the budget for the office, and the juvenile division spends about just as much, I wish I brought the numbers, but just as much in their division as district court, okay? District court has a higher volume of cases, and they're dealing with adults. So I'm thinking to myself, why are we spending this much money on less kids? You know, it doesn't make any sense to me. I think the budget's reflection of our values and principles, and I think that money should be going towards diversion programs or community programs. What are we doing with the youth pending adjudication? Where are we sending them to? What's going on? Having an assessment in our office, I think is helpful to determine what's going on with them pending trial. There is a pretrial program, in place, but having a state attorney's office work in conjunction with pretrial, I think will be helpful to determine what's the best way to handle any lack of resources pending the adjudication. That's really what it comes down to. It's that something's going on at home that they're not getting and they're acting out. It could be a variety of things. It could be relationship issues. I've had cases where, a girlfriend and girlfriend got into a fight and it ends up as a criminal charge. And really, they're in a relationship, but they don't know how to handle conflict. But it ends up as a criminal charge, right? But no one's taking the time to analyze that, right? And that's the kind of analysis that I want to seek as the next prosecutor, really kind of harping on how we are going to change the way we're doing juvenile justice. It's going to take it's going to take a lot of work, because I know that people like to have things in place and people like the status quo. But our youth deserve better. I said before, we spend a lot of money, a lot of energy on making sure our students are the best in Montgomery County, and they are. But when most of those same students are Black and brown in the system, we have a problem. And it's an unnecessary problem for this county.
Thank you for the answer.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Bernice. And Gail and Craig will come back to your question at the end. Right now, I'd like to pivot to our conversation with Robert Bass. Robert Bass is a candidate for Montgomery County Sheriff. The incumbent, Darren Popkin, has announced his retirement from the Montgomery County Courthouse, and Robert is a leading candidate for sheriff. So without further ado, Robert Bass, please join us.
Hello, how you doing? Excuse my lighting, I'm in the car, traveling, pulled over to the side. Thank you, Alan, thank you, Betsy, for this invitation to Progressive Legacy. Let me give you a little bit about my background. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, and raised by 9 women, my mom, my grandmother, and my aunts. I left New York to attend University of Miami on a football scholarship, where I earned my criminal justice degree. After playing at the University of Miami, I went on to the NFL and played for the Chicago Bears and the Green Bay Packers for several years. Then I moved my family here to Maryland, where I became a sheriff deputy. I'm sorry, let me back up one. After leaving the NFL, I worked for the Miami Dolphins as a director of player development. In that role, I oversaw the entire rookie class that came in and ran different programs to help people with basic life needs, such as how to write a mortgage, check writing, going back to college, getting them back on the path while they were pursuing their professional career. After leaving there, I moved to Maryland, where I became a sheriff deputy for 8 years. I was a sheriff deputy for 8 years and worked primarily in a domestic violence unit. And then after leaving the sheriff's office, I started my own company, a security company that I've been running for the last 7 years. which brings us to this point right here. In the last 7 years, working in the security field, working with other professionals, I saw this as an opportunity to give back and act on what was going on in today's society. Today, there's a crisis going on, and I want to bring a holistic approach to policing through the sheriff's office. Let me explain the two differences of what police do and what the sheriff's office does. Police is a call for service. So if you call 911, the police will show up. The sheriff's office is the law enforcement arm of the judicial system. So through the courts, anything that's done through the courts, such as child support, subpoenas, warrants, evictions, prisoner transport to and from jails, and there are a host of attachments. There are other issues other sections that they have within the sheriff's office. What I want to do is bring accountability, community engagement, and transparency to the sheriff's office. With my accountability, I want to improve the training of the sheriff deputies. I want to also add mental health experts to go out on special calls such as EAPs, which is emergency evaluation petitions, that will help in de-escalating situations as opposed to, having to use force to solve the situations. And with my community engagement, I want to create a cadet program where officers are looked at as protectors, not warriors. And that's what I grew up in New York City was called a police athletic league. I was taught how to golf, how to swim, how to play basketball and other sports. And the officers became mentors to me. So if they saw me doing something wrong, they say, hey, Robert, watch out. I'm going to tell your mom, I'm going to check on you. And I respected them. Then the transparency piece is I want to bring to the sheriff's office, there's a little known fact that the sheriffs pull out their weapon more than police officers. And what I want to do with them is that attach a camera, just like their body cam, to their gun so that you can see what they see at the end of their weapon. So it's transparent in what they're going to have to write down and explain for any situation. Something else I would like to bring to the table and working in conjunction with the state's attorney office is if you're convicted twice of a domestic violence, I want to create a domestic violence registry, just like it would be a sexual assault, a sex offenders registry. So bring that into the table so that people can have information to make informed decisions on how they want to live their life and bring a different vision and leadership to the sheriff's office.
Please ask questions of candidate Robert Bass. Robert, do people call you Robert?
Yes.
I was wondering, as you've traveled around the county, what's your sense of how much people know about the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office and what the sheriff does, and how do you think you can enhance that understanding of this important office?
What I'm finding out, most people don't know what the sheriff's office do. They didn't know it existed. So what I would propose is more community engagement. I like to ride bikes. I want to create festivals throughout the year so people could get to know what sheriffs do and how important they are to the community. I also want to expand the domestic violence unit so they can be a call for service that will assist the police department so that they can see that we are a valuable part of the community.
I have a question. Who does the sheriff's department report to? Would it be Bernice?
No, actually sheriff reports.
The Attorney General?
It's sort of a unique situation. The sheriff's office does not have a boss. So they're boss, so to not a boss, but they're accountable to the county exec, to the county council, to them. So they got to go through the county exec and the county council in order to get things approved regarding the budget. But they're the highest ranking law enforcement officer in the county. And really the boss is per se the governor.
Okay, and go Bears.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. The Bears.
So,
The Bears.
Rosie, did you want to say
okay,
something?
yeah, yes, I did. I have to say that a lot of us know the current sheriff because we have spent an awful lot of time with him outside of the voting booths. And I suggest you come to Leisure World. And my only question is, we live very near Belpre Road and Connecticut Avenue, where there are a lot of apartments. And in the past, when people have been evicted, they've done it in all sorts of weather, including the rain. And I understand that in the district that this is not allowed. And I would hope that you would put an end to that. Thank you.
Yes. In the sheriff's office, the law, not I won't say it's the law, but there is requirements that if it's below a certain temperature or if it's raining, that they do not throw out the person's belongings or evict people during that time.
Good.
Sandra, go right ahead.
Yes, I have a question. What is the relationship between the chief of police and the sheriff? It would seem to me that they would run joint programs, work together. Can you talk about that a bit?
Well, yes, there's a partnership, and that's what I want to bring to the table is a holistic approach with the chief of police, the state's attorney's office, so that we all sit down at the table and work together. Yes, there should be a strong relationship with the chief of police. The difference is that, one is elected, which is the sheriff, and the other one is appointed. And when you sit down and talk, there's different job functions based on what police does and based on what the sheriff's office do. But we definitely can work together in creating community programs for the youth through the police department and the sheriff's office that will have them look upon people in uniform in a different way.
Have you discussed this with anybody else in the police department, for example?
Yes, I reached out to them to share my views on how I want to make this a joint effort and how we can make the community better and safer for all, especially the youth.
Good.
Robert, how important do you think it is for the Montgomery County Courthouse to have leadership from communities of color? I mean, one of the sad facts of our history is that since 1776, when Montgomery County was established, there have been no minority leaders in the Montgomery County Courthouse. How do you think your election or Bernice's election would change that in the community?
Well, I think it's a great thing. We live in a diverse community. We have to have representatives from all walks of life. My experience in my past is working on a team with a diverse group of men and women in a business industry, and it brings a different perspective. If you always had the same perspective, you could never really change what's going on. We want to bring a new vision, new life, and a different style of leadership of what we've seen in the past. So it would be enriching, because if you have a diverse group of people, you get different perspectives, which adds to the room. And we will definitely add to the room.
It's Donna, and I had a question for Robert.
Yes, Donna.
Okay. I was very interested in what you were saying about domestic violence, because that's an issue that I'm a recent transplant from New York, by the way. And that was one of the issues that we were focusing on, and what I wanted to ask you, I believe that you did address it, the whole concept of collaboration and coordination of various governmental agencies or departments to better understand how each other functions, and to be able to coordinate efforts to improve the system. What I mean by that is that in New York, what seemed to help a lot was sitting down with the police department, social service agencies, representatives of the court system, et cetera, and so much related to a lack of understanding as to how the different parts work. And once they were able to compare notes and understand better the functioning of the efforts to improve the system, seem to just go through the ceiling in terms of improvement. So I know it sounds that I'm rambling, but my question is, do you see this collaboration and coordination as part of your approach or your plan as far as things like domestic violence and then other related aspects in the sheriff's department?
Yes. I was once taught by a coach, it's called team. Together, everyone achieves more. So the more heads we get in the room, the more people we can talk, we can hash out what differences we may have, but come together to create the solution. Like he just asked about the diversity in the room. If it's only my opinion and I don't have anyone to bounce it off of or to solidify it that it's a good opinion or a bad opinion, it's not an opinion because there's no one else to talk to. But if we have 3-4 different people sitting in there talking about it, working out the good and the bad, yes, it's better for the community and better for all.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? I can't see everybody, but if there's a question, please just speak up.
Yeah, I have one, actually a suggestion, Alan. Make sure that you send us the websites. I've already looked them up for Bernice and Robert for fundraising purposes.
Yes.
So that we have it in an email where we can look up. I have found them both on my phone, but if you could send them to all of us in an email, that would be great.
Thank you. Yes, Bass for Sheriff, bassforsheriff.com.
And Mireku-North.com, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I'll send those around after our meeting. Robert, do you have any sense of how diverse the current sheriff's department is? I've heard that there is an issue there, and we're hopeful that we could recruit more officers, sheriff officers of color. Do you have any sense about the diversity in the Montgomery Sheriff's Office?
I do, but I don't have the exact number, but there is a problem. And in part of my community engagement is going out into the community and hiring from within the community. There's a large attrition problem because the problem I see is that they are hiring people and using taxpayers' dollars to teach them and train them. And then they're leaving the sheriff's office and going to other agencies after they've been trained, such as not only county police, but going to Howard County, going to other different agencies when we already spent our dollars on training them and getting them right. But my piece with hiring from within the community, it's a twofold process in that when you hire some from within the community, they have more empathy in working with people in the community. They know the community. They have a better understanding of the language of the community, and they'll be able to help and become mentors within the community. So yes, I would like to hire and have a diverse workforce.
What was your experience when you were sheriff? Were you working in Montgomery County, the Montgomery County?
Yes.
And
yes, Montgomery County.
What are your recollections of your 8-year experience in the sheriff's department in Montgomery County?
Repeat that. I didn't hear the last part.
What's your recollection of your experience working in the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office?
There are some good people that work for the sheriff's office. I just found that the leadership and there was no opportunity for growth. There were a lot of biased things that went along in the sheriff's office that I would correct and have everyone be on equal footing.
Can you name some of those biases?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Well, they have currently they have about 9 to 10 EOC complaints about how supervisors are dealing with minorities within the sheriff's office, being male or female. There are female complaint about in that arena.
Okay.
Our experience is that the courthouse has been a bit of a black box and there is no transparency, little transparency and little accountability. And that for the most part, we only see these elected state officers because the Register of Wills, the clerk of the court, the sheriff and state's attorney are state office holders. We usually see them only at parades very
Correct.
frequently. So we're pushing for a lot more community engagement. So this resonates with us as well. Does anybody else have a question for Mr. Bass?
Yes, Craig Carter, I have a question. I understand it may not be specific to Montgomery County, but a lot of sheriff officers are quitting about mandatory vaccines. And I want to know what your views or biases are.
Oh my gosh.
Right, and that's a tough question because is the individual right as it stands right now. But if the county exec and someone orders them that we would have to do that, then that's what they would have to do.
Would they
And
quit?
I'm fully vaccinated. I'm boosted, and I believe that people should, for the greater good, especially if you're working in the community and you're always touching the community. That's just my belief, but I don't create the law to make them do that. And I wouldn't be in position to create it. I mean, to tell them to do if I'm not mandated by law.
Thank you for that question, Craig and Gail. Couldn't really get to it earlier, so I'm glad you're able to raise it. Robert, what kind of events are you going to during your campaign? Have you been all over the county? Have you sensed differences in opinions about law enforcement in East County or West County, North County, Down County?
Yes, I've been to toy drives. I just was at Interfaith Toy Drive this past weekend. I've been to some of the shelters down in Silver Spring. I'm working my way up the county. I've been to the Germantown Democratic. They had a function up in wine country. I don't say wine country, but up there. And the feeling I'm getting is people don't distinguish between sheriff and police. They see people in a uniform and they don't have a good feeling about it. And I'm sharing the word that you have to change your perspective. I want to change their perspective in that we're not warriors, we're protectors. We're not coming to fight or beat you up. We're coming to protect you and serve you. So that's been resonating with several people as I talk to them and share my vision on how I want to lead the sheriff's office and how I want to get the community involved and the state's attorneys involved and the county council involved so that we all can do this together collectively.
Well, thank you. That's a good place to stop this conversation with Robert Bass, candidate for Montgomery County Sheriff. I'm asking our group, do you have any questions for either Bernice North or for Robert Bass before we sign off on this program?
I just would like to thank Mr. Robert Bass and my sister Bernice. I'd like really to thank both of them for coming to talk to us this evening. I am so proud of the both of you. Thank you so very much.
Amen.
Just want to say hi to Rosamond. It's Donna.
It's so cute.
Well, thank you. Thank you both for joining us this evening at Progressive Legacy. Robert, safe trip out to Ohio. We'll look forward to upon your return back to the county. Bernice,
Thank you.
Bernice, thank you for everything you've done for Montgomery County. Your work with the task force was really path-breaking, and we're still trying to implement your recommendations. So thank you both very much for joining us. This program will be available for your use in a few hours. So on behalf of Progressive Legacy, I want to thank you both for participating in this afternoon's program. And we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank
so
you, and
much.
everyone have a happy holiday and enjoy
Well,
yourself
thank you.
and stay
Thank
safe.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you.
Thank
Same to
you.
you.
Same to
Be
you.
safe, everyone.